We took a camera in the video back in the day, and we did film in the system.
So you used to be able to film? Is that
No, we took it.
Oh, you just did?
Surreptitiously, illegally.
Through the IDF? That was the...
No. Through my son, who was 15, in a bag, and just filmed everything.
Oh, okay. All right. We're rolling here. We're live. Actually, we're not live. We're being taped. Yeah.
It's your line.
We're on 148. And since we haven't met in a few weeks, I'm going to start back at the Mishnah, although we've gone over it already. But it's worth going over it again. So 148 on the third paragraph, where it says Mishnah, or in Hebrew, Matnitin. And with this very disturbing, troubling Mishnah, and in the Gemara, we'll spend several pages unpacking it. So I'm not going to analyze it in its fullness at this point because we've gone through it. But I'll review it and then just kind of go through to where we left off. Okay? Al shalosh avirot nashim metot b'sha'at leidatan. For 3 sins, the punishment for 3 sins, or for violation of 3 practices, women die in childbirth. So already it starts with very dramatic. And, it gets to some very dramatic discussions and troubling discussions. So we'll go through it. Al she'enan zera b'nida, because they don't pay attention to the laws of menstrual purity. That's 1. 2, b'chala, because they don't pay attention to the commandment of chala, which is that when you bake a challah, you take a little piece of it, just a little piece of it, and you throw it in the oven and you burn it up. And that's supposed to be reminiscent of the sacrifice of the first fruits. Okay, so the first fruits are, really that's incumbent upon all the Israelites, is you bring the first of your fruit, of your crop, of your flock, and you sacrifice that to God. The only reminiscent we have of that now is the challah ritual, where you take a tiny bit of the challah that you bake and you burn it up. Okay, anybody ever done that before? Okay.
By choice.
What do you mean, not by choice? Oh, yeah, no, I burn the challah all the time. That's not what I meant. Yeah, I burn anything. But I'm talking about the ritual of taking a piece of challah. Yes?
I think isn't there some rule, if you just bake one little challah, you don't have to, but if you bake like so much quantity.
There is a rule. I don't know what the rule is. Yeah, there is a rule. But, I mean, if you want to be safe, and the Mishnah is here warning us to be safe, if you want to be safe, whenever you bake a challah, you take a little bit and you throw it into basically your broiler, or you burn it up.
You put it in the oven with the challah, and because it's only a little bit, by the time the big challah bakes, it burns it up.
Yeah, okay. And the last one is v'hadlakat haner, lighting Shabbos candles. So not doing those things, not paying attention to the laws of menstruation, challah, or lighting Shabbos candles, according to the Mishnah, leads to death in childbirth.
Is that the only reason for death in childbirth?
No. But these things will lead to death in childbirth. That's what the claim is. So the Gemara, the rabbis now, like us, are troubled by that, confused, have all these questions, and we have pages of their questions, okay? So, and their comments on it. So I'm going to keep going. So it starts with Gemara. Nida maitama. So starting with menstruation. So what's the connection between not following the laws of menstruation? And you know what I mean, right? It's going to the mikveh. Basically, it's going to the mikveh. It's the laws of family purity. Okay. So what is the reason that there's this harsh punishment for violating those laws? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So Rabbi Yitzchak has an opinion. He kilkala b'chadrei vitna. By the way, a lot of this sounds very cool. I'm just going to go through it, and then we'll try to understand it, unpack it soon. But right now, I'm just reading it and translating it. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, she messed up. The kilkala kind of means she screwed up, she messed up. In her innards, b'chadrei bitna means literally it means the rooms of her belly. But so that's where menstruation comes up. That's where she messed up. Lefichach tilkeh. Kind of a play on words. Kilkala means that she messed up. Tilkeh means she will be afflicted. It's the passive voice. She will be afflicted b'chadrei vitna, also in her innards. So because giving birth to children, that's sort of a weak response. Okay, so she messed up in a law that has to do with her innards, so God punishes her in her innards. Okay, fine. Go on. But then, so the rabbis asked, now the Talmud asks, Tenach nida. Okay, so actually, in fact, you do see the connection. There's a conceptual connection between menstruation and childbirth. Okay, even if there's not really an ethical connection. right? There's no clear ethical cause and effect. At least there's a biological connection between menstruation and giving birth. So at least we can get the conceptual connection, the biological connection. But these other two, chala v'hadlakat haner ma'ikal meimar. Right. So what is the connection between the chala ritual and lighting Shabbos candles and death in childbirth? How are they at all connected? How are those things at all connected? All right. So now we get to a very interesting little statement, midrash from one of the rabbis, which starts to unpack for us at least the symbolic meaning of these rituals. If not it doesn't really go into the ethical issues of the punishment itself, but it starts to at least unpack for us so we can start to clarify the symbolic meaning of these rituals, which becomes very important. Yeah?
Could that piece of challah be a surrogate for the firstborn?
It absolutely is a surrogate. All of these things have very profound symbolic significance. Okay? So when you go to Italy, you start to understand the power of symbols. So for Judaism, it's not so much icons that are symbols, but it's rituals that are symbols. They symbolize something very deep and important in the human experience and our relationship to God. So what the rabbis are going to try to do now is understand the symbolic significance of these rituals. So these are not empty rituals. They represent something very important, and by violating those rituals, you're actually violating something that's very key to the human experience with God. That's going to be the theory anyway. So let me go through. Kidarash Hahu Galila. So we have a teaching from that Galilean. And I mentioned a couple weeks ago that sometimes that Galilean refers to Jesus. They don't want to say his name, but he was a teacher that they'd heard of. And then they knew who he was by the time of the Talmud, which is the 3rd, 4th century, so they don't want to say his name. This can't be that Galilean. This must be a different Galilean, because we find out when he lived in a second. Ale de Rav Chisda, because it's something that he taught Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda lived in the 4th century. So it's not Jesus. It's another Galilean. Anyway, interesting little side point. Amara Kadosh Baruch Hu. So God says, Revi'it dam natati bachem. I created you. A fourth of your body is blood. So I said, don't take this to the bank biologically, literally. I have no idea if that's correct or not. My guess is it's probably incorrect. It's what these rabbis thought. It's probably more, isn't it? Anybody know? I don't know. 1/5. All right, that's pretty good. So they're pretty close. So a lot of your body is blood. It's not just that a lot of your body is blood. What this is trying to say is your essence, so your life force. Blood is your life force, right? It's most of who you are. And God gave that to you. Okay, so it says, Al iske dam, he's harti etchem. So therefore, anything having to do with blood in a commandment, I'm very serious about. He's harti etchem means I warn you, but it means I take it seriously. So I want you to take it seriously. So here is at least part of the symbolic significance of the family purity laws is that they have to do with blood. Blood is a symbol. So blood symbolizes the life force, the gift of life that God gives you. So therefore, in return, I insist on you taking it seriously as a symbol, because it symbolizes the gift of life that I give to you. Now, does that mean you merit the death penalty for violating that, which would, by the way, would 99% of all Jewish women would get it at that point. So no, it's not an ethical explanation. It's an explanation of the symbolic significance of the laws of family purity. They represent blood. Blood is a life force. So I insist, God, this is what it says, I insist that you take that seriously, that gift of blood that I give you. So that's the connection between the laws of family purity and this very serious punishment. And keep going. Reshit karati etchem. So this is the rabbis continuing. I called you the first among nations. You get that designation. You carry that designation with pride. So we might have ethical problems with that also. Just feeling, well, why should we be the first? Who's the first? Doesn't matter. We have our right, and I believe this too. We have our right to pride in who we are. And pride in who we are implies that we feel that we are very special and unique. Other nations have that right too, but we have that right. Reshit karati etchem. I've called you, I've designated you the first among nations, and you take pride in that. Al iske reshit hisarti etchem. So what I insist in return is that you take seriously the ritual of the firstborn. And that's what that ritual is. So that ritual of you give the first of your crops, right? The first sacrifice. That's all I'm asking right now, God is saying, is you give me a little bit of challah. You give me a little bit of challah because, it's got symbolic significance. It signifies how I think of you as being unique and the first among nations. And your pride in that, your pride in being Jewish is a great gift that God gives you. So I need to understand that you're taking that seriously. And the only way I understand that is through that ritual. So therefore, I take the ritual seriously. You need to take it seriously. I take it seriously. And the last one, remember, is lighting Shabbat candles. Nishama shenatati bachem kruya ner. The soul that I give you, I refer to as a candle. So it's again unpacking the symbolic significance of Shabbat candles. They're not just candles anymore. They represent the human soul. So what's the human soul? It's our connection to God. It's our exception to the world. It's our connection to the world of the spirit. I give you that. The candle is what symbolizes that. It's interesting, and we don't have time to go into why does a candle signify the soul? Because it's a flame is very powerful, but it's also incorporeal. It kind of floats up to heaven. Fire is a flame of a candle. It's also very vulnerable. You can put it out really easily. So it reminds us of the gift of the soul. The blood reminds us of the gift of physical life. The candle reminds us of the gift of eternal life, right? Spiritual life. And so I give you that. God says, I give you that soul. I give you your body, but I also give you your soul. And in return, I expect you to recognize that. And you can only recognize it through rituals. And the ritual is Shabbat candles. Yes?
So if you think of oxygen, there can't be a flame without oxygen.
Right.
And if you think of it as a breath, you can't exist without oxygen either.
Right.
So maybe it's that kind of connection.
That's a good connection. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. Oxygen, breath is also
right.
Because very often
so
the soul.
Another thing that symbolizes being alive.
And the other thing that symbolizes soul.
So
in a lot of our sources.
Yes, because you breathe.
It's the same word. Right, the same word. It's nishama, which is soul, which is also the word for breath. Yeah. And ruach is a word for soul, which means wind. Yeah. So that's good. So that's another. The candle is a powerful symbol for soul, but also breath is a symbol for soul. Oxygen. So oxygen feeds the flame, right? So
right. Without it, the flame could not exist.
Right. It's good.
Infinite,
eternal.
Eternity, but you also have a finite. Symbol there with the candle eventually
burns out. Eventually burns out.
Right.
Yeah.
Rabbi,
yeah.
The challah burning.
Yeah.
Is it only then during your childbearing years and up until then after that for your grandchildren?
It's a good question. It's a good question. Yeah. So I'm going to hold on that question because they really spent a lot of time wondering, why that punishment? Why punish during childbearing? And so I'll hold off, and I think we're going to get to it. So it's okay. Because the answer is going to be no. It's not just during childbirth. There's something unique about childbirth that connects these three rituals, but it's not just during childbirth. All right, let me go on. So if you follow these rituals, and by the way, the rituals are really the essence of our relationship with God and our gratitude to life, because blood, again, represents the life force, the physical life that we have. The challah represents our unique place in the world and our unique connection to God. And the candle represents our soul, so our spiritual life. So if you take those things seriously by acting them out in the rituals, that's great. Imlav, if you don't, Harene no tal nishmatchem, I take your life from you.
Well, I wasted it on you.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. All right, now. It's a lot of responsibility. Yeah. It's a lot of responsibility. Yeah, but it's yeah. We haven't really even touched the surface of the moral issues here, but don't worry about it. We'll get to it. We've got pages of it. Okay. And also, you're allowed to think differently than them. You can disagree. We're just trying to understand the ideas. Okay. Page 149. Umayshna b'shat ledatan. All right. So this is Stephanie's question. So then why during childbirth? Well, and it's the same thing. Is it so it's only during childbirth that God punishes or God takes people's lives that violate these things, and lurking behind this question, which we'll get to, is only women, like men don't get punished for these things. It's only the woman's responsibility to assert these connections. So they ask the same questions that we would ask. Umay shna bishat leidatan, why during childbirth? Amar Rava. So Rava says, Nifal Torah chadad sakina. If an ox falls, sharpen the knife. That should be obvious to all of you what he means, right? I'm just joking. It's not, it's not obvious at all. It sounds right. It sounds like a Confucius statement, right? Yeah, no. So I'm going to tell you if you keep reading it. So what it's basically saying is that God only punishes people when they are vulnerable, when they're already vulnerable, and it's an astonishing view of how God punishes. And the whole idea of reward and punishment, and also the whole notion of vulnerability. So God, what it's claiming is that God only punishes when you're vulnerable. So that's and remember, hovering over this discussion really is, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do evil people seem to prosper? So one answer to why do evil people seem to prosper is that the way the world works is God doesn't punish anybody unless there's an opening. And the opening is a moment of vulnerability. And by the way, that comes for everybody at some point. There's always a moment of vulnerability. And childbirth, to this day, but certainly during Talmudic times, was profound vulnerability, real vulnerability. So the answer to childbirth is just that it's a moment of real vulnerability. So you can get away with things your whole life, up until that vulnerable time. When you reach that vulnerable time, this is their theology. That's when it's almost like God needs a little bit of an opening, a foot in the door, to be able to then punish. Yeah.
I'd just like to bring up a point that it's not something that we need to discuss now, but I'd just like to have it hovering.
Sure.
I think I asked the other day, well, if you have something happens, bad happens to you, that's recognition that you have sinned somewhere. And this was the argument that was used after the Second Revolt to abandon Judaism, because God was unhappy with the Jews because there's these two revolts and this massive killing. And I think this is one of the early churches, is one of their arguments.
Yeah, right.
So
right, yeah. I know it's a troubling sort of mischievous.
It's a troubling thought process.
Right, it is, and but not uncommon. So it's not uncommon. I think to this day, there are people that think, well, I'm sick, I must have done something wrong, and or that person's sick, so that person must have done something wrong. It seems to be something ingrained in our DNA. We often leap to that, and it's often a really foolish leap and a damaging leap. So I think in some ways the rabbis are examining that idea, and a lot of them believed it. A lot of people today believed it. So I don't know that they're claiming here that all misfortune is a result of sin, but there is this idea. I don't know. What I would say is they're asking the question: is misfortune a result of sin? The Mishnah is saying sometimes, when a woman dies in childbirth, it's a result of sin. So the Mishnah is answering yes. And the rabbis are struggling with that. They're spending pages struggling with it. It's all in the Talmud.
This is not in the Torah anywhere, is it?
Is what in the Torah?
This concept
of a woman dying in childbirth for violating these commandments. No.
Okay, so
it's not directly in the Torah.
This is made up.
Made up.
Through the oral.
It's the oral Torah.
There are evidences in the Torah too of people dying or plagues that break out because of things that Israel has done. So it's the same vulnerability transferred into the mass of the sinning of the people that creates the demise, in a sense.
So let's hold on that. To say that it's made up is interesting. I don't know what their thought processes are. We haven't gotten to.
It's man-made, not.
Well, they wouldn't say that. They're deriving it from Scripture. We haven't gotten to that yet. At some point, they're going to quote verses to prove it. They often wait till the end to do that. So anyway, let me keep going. Now, we have a bunch of folk sayings here that all come to the same point, which is that when you're vulnerable is when God swoops in. So the first one is like when a cow stumbles, then you should sharpen the knife because that means it's vulnerable.
And then use it as food?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. All it says is when a cow stumbles, it's vulnerable. So that's when you can kill it.
That's right.
Yeah. The point is, it's the vulnerability that opens the door to a really bad thing. Okay. Another one. Abaye Emar Tafish Terus Amta Bichad Machtara Lehave. Okay. So when basically it says that a maid servant can be insolent her whole life, and then she will pay for it in one blow. Okay, which is it's a folk saying. We have folk sayings too. We have fun with our folk sayings. They have their folk saying. The point of this folk saying is that a person can get away with sins all the time. Don't let that bother you. That's what it's trying to say. Don't let it bother you that you see this wicked person, Madoff, getting away with stuff his whole life. At some point, you pay for it. So what they're saying is the world doesn't work like this. Every time you sin, you get punished. If the world worked like that, nobody would sin, because we would learn our lesson very quickly. The world works like this: you sin your whole life, and there's an accounting, and ultimately, you get punished for it. And when do you get punished? At a vulnerable time. Okay. Rav Chista Amar, again another folk saying, Shiva kele Ravaya de lenafshay nafal. Okay, so you don't worry. Eventually, the drunk will fall. You can get away with drunkenness for a long time. Actually, I know lots of people. It's actually an interesting thing I have experience with it. I know alcoholics that get away with it till the age of 50, 60. They never get caught. There's nothing, and then suddenly, there's a terrible accident, and you don't get away with it forever. It's a folk saying, so it's saying nobody gets away with something forever. Eventually, Providence catches up with you. You reach a point of vulnerability. All right. Mar Ukva Amar. All these are folk sayings. I like this one. Raya Chigra v'ize Riatan. This is an interesting one because it's an analogy, and you have to try to
The people.
Yeah, it is. But look at this. So God is what it literally means is a lame shepherd. The shepherd is lame, and the sheep are running wild, right? So who's God in this?
God is the shepherd.
God is the lame. Yeah, God's the shepherd, but the lame shepherd. A lot of this really implies that God can. So here's one way I could phrase it. God will only punish you at your moment of vulnerability. Another way of saying it is God can only punish you at your moment of vulnerability, implying that there's some lack of possibility for God.
That's
right. God is a shepherd who's guiding us, but God's a lame shepherd. God can't, and that's why the sheep are running wild. Right. Why are people running wild? Because God's lame. God's got some control, but not full control. So this becomes an idea that God is not all powerful, and Harold Kushner develops that in his book when bad things happen to good people. But he didn't pull that out of thin air. I mean, there are examples of that in Jewish thought. So God is the lame shepherd. But let me finish it. So the sheep are running wild. Abav chutra mile. So when you're on one side of the gate, all you got is talk. Mile. All God can do is warn you. You're going to get it. Don't keep running around like wild sheep. That's all. God's only tool at that point are words. God can warn us over and over again. The above dare, but once you're in the gate, so now the sheep are penned in, and the lame shepherd has control over them. Chushpana. At that point, there's an accounting. So if we unpack this metaphor, it says God doesn't have much power against us in this life. We can run wild. In this life, God's lame. Once we get to the next life, there's a kind of a pen, and now it's time for an accounting. So it's a very interesting folk saying, which shows that you get away with things your whole life, but there's a point where you won't.
That's right. But it also implicates the seriousness and vulnerability associated with free will.
Yeah.
Because by giving you free will.
They give you free will. That's it. That's the sheep running wild. That's the lame. God disables himself. That's the lameness. The lameness is I give you free will. Right. And all I can do, my only power, my only tool right now is to warn you. Where's the warning? It's in the Torah. Read the Torah. The Torah tells you won't get away with it forever. But I can't stop you. That's interesting. So that's what this is saying. I can't stop you. I'm lame. I can't stop you. But there's going to come a point where you're going to be in the gate. And once you're in the gate, chushpana. I like that too. Chushpana just means then there's an accounting. An accounting.
Instead of the gate, maybe the grave.
Yeah, that's right. It's a pen. No, you're right. It's a pen. It's an enclosed space. It's like this world is not enclosed, so we can run wild. We do, but there's a point where there'll be an enclosed space. So maybe it's an allusion to the grave. Maybe.
Right. That's why elderly people at the last
Yeah,
years of their life
sure.
become more.
They do. Yeah. All right. Next is Rav Papa, and Rav Papa here writes a blues lyric that becomes
Nobody loves you.
That's right. Nobody loves you when you're down and out. Rav Papa Amar. Abav chanvata nefishe ache umerachame. Okay, when your chanvata is chanvata means prosperity. It's from the word for market. When you're doing well in the market. When you then people love you. That's you have brothers all over the place. Everybody is your brother, and everybody loves you. Abav bizyone, when you're in disgrace. Lo ache, suddenly you don't have a single brother. No, nobody is that close to you. Nobody wants to designate you as brother. Velo merachame, and nobody loves you. Nobody loves you when you're down and out. Right. So now, what that connection is to the previous folk sayings, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think it's a nice saying, though. Right. It's true. It's true. Okay. All right.
Really learned that.
All right. We got just a few minutes to get to another important question.
Dennis Rodman.
Sorry?
Dennis Rodman.
Yeah, Dennis Rodman.
That's beyond.
Vigavre, hecha midbake. Okay, so what about men? All right, so chushbana there, means there's an accounting. The whole conversation relates back to this issue of women that don't follow these commandments. So they ask, what about men? I mean, what's the, so, and really it goes back to, so the moment of pure vulnerability for a woman is when she's giving birth. What are the moments of vulnerability for men? And really the greater question is, don't men have to pay for these things too? So the answer is, of course, yes. Vigavre, hecha midbaki, amar Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish says, so what are the moments of vulnerability? B'sha'ah shovrim ala gesher. At the moment that you're crossing a bridge. So crossing a bridge is the moment of vulnerability for a man. So if you've been sinning your whole life, and God is looking for that, crack in the door, so God can open up and punish you, when is that for a man? It's when you cross a bridge. Okay? Because bridges are dangerous. Okay, now the question is, v'gesher v'tulo, just the bridge? And the answer is, ema ke'ein gesher. No, the answer is anything in your life that's like a bridge. The bridge is just a symbol for all sorts of moments of vulnerability. Now they give some examples, but all sorts of moments of vulnerability. When you're in your moment of vulnerability, this is the theology, take it or leave it. God can swoop in and then punish you for your crimes. Yes?
Is the converse ever expressed in the Talmud or the Torah that God can make you feel good because of something you've done?
Oh, sure, yes, of course. We're just not talking about that right now.
I mean, but is it just the punishment?
No. There's a lot about reward. Yeah, there's a lot about reward. Maybe there's a little bit more about punishment because that's the idea is to motivate people.
It took me a moment to think of it, but this one about I think there's a modern corollary that success has 1,000 fathers.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
This bridge is this 30 days, the 11th to the 12th month after your death. In other words, you were in that limbo state of the bridge.
I think the bridge, though, is here on earth. Moments of vulnerability. That's that the bridge symbolizes. I mean, in those days, the bridges weren't like, the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, the bridges were going to be these. You have to, like in the 4th century, what was a bridge? It was probably just some boulders you threw across or some logs. So, yeah, it was a vulnerable place. And then they say, symbolize a bridge. Remember Rav Nachman saying, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar ma'od, the whole world is a narrow bridge? That's what they're talking about, these narrow bridges. So, and Rav Nachman probably is alluding to this too. The whole world is a time of vulnerability. Life is a time of vulnerability. That's your life. It's always a time of vulnerability. So the important thing is not to be afraid. So he builds on that. So the rabbis are saying avoid moments of vulnerability because that's a time the punisher can swoop in. So Rav Nachman builds on that and says, well, the whole world really is a time of vulnerability. Let's not be afraid of vulnerability. Anyway, let me read a little bit more. And Rav, so the rabbi named Rav, Lo avar b'mavra diatev be'goy. So Rav had a practice. He would never cross a ferry First of all, crossing a ferry would open you.
In a
A
ferry.
river in a ferry.
Yeah, river in a ferry. So we never get on a ferry,
That's right.
because that's also a moment of vulnerability too. But especially if there was a goy, if there was a non-Jew piloting it, who we didn't trust. So don't get caught up in sort of the bigotry of it. There's a stranger. It's a stranger. It's somebody who's not of my tribe. So there's two vulnerabilities there. One is that a ferry is a dangerous thing to be in, and Rav sounds a little overcautious here. Yeah, and the rabbis have ideas about that. But so Rav is saying, I myself personally, I never go in a river ferry where there's someone I don't trust that's driving it. Not because I'm afraid the guy's going to kill me, because that will put me in a place of vulnerability, and then God will have the opening to swoop down and punish me for my sins. And Rav, who's a great rabbi, is acknowledging that there's sins there.
But Shmuel has the opposite point.
Yeah, so Shmuel's always Rav and Shmuel study together. So Rav says, Dilma mifkadle dina ale, umitfisana bahadeh. And so he says, because perhaps at that point God will settle accounts with me, will give me my judgment, and that'll be exactly the moment I'll be vulnerable. Shmuel, who was Rav's study partner, his antagonist, his friend, Lo avad ela b'mavre di begoy. So Shmuel would only go in a ferry that was driven by a non-Jew, by a goy. Amar, because he had his own sitna betray ume lo shalit, because he would say Satan never rules two people at the same time. So Satan is not going to punish a Jew and a non-Jew all at once.
He's saying the non-Jew's going to get it.
And he'll assume the non-Jew's going to get it. So he'll, it's a very interesting superstition, but he'll assume that I'm safe with the non-Jew because Satan doesn't ever punish two people at once. So he'll punish the non-Jew and not me.
Is that the concept that the non-Jew has to follow the same?
I think it's Rav and Shmuel playing around with each other. Rav says something. Rav says, I would never go in a ferry boat with a goy. Shmuel says, I would only go in a ferry boat with a goy. That was their relation. That was their relationship. They were like a married couple. We'll leave it at that.
But what's this thing about saying